Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about the books that I have recently finished reading. I just got done recording another edition of Fresh Red Kills where I focused on young people's horror literature. This one is for the grown-ups. So today I'm going to be talking about The Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan. Sorry for the glare in the sun. And also Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. So first, let's talk about the Peloponnesian War. I read this for Historathon 2023, an event that I spearheaded this year. It's a year-long reading event, and I'm joined by some awesome co-hosts along the way. And essentially, we are celebrating and promoting the reading of nonfiction history. We have split up the year into 4 quarters, each 3 months long, and each of those quarters looks at a different period of time. So from January, February, March, we are looking at prehistory up to the year 500 CE or AD 500, whichever one you prefer. So earlier in the month of January, I had read Antiquity by Norman F. Cantor, and this was my second pick for January. So Donald Kagan, a very well-known scholar on this subject, certainly one who has passed away. But I was really happy to find this hardcover edition at a book sale at one point. Or else it was book sale or a secondhand shop. I don't remember exactly. But either way, I was excited to find it in a hardcover edition, even if it's a little bit sun-washed or sun-bleached on the end there. Now, Kagan had written a multi-volume history of the Peloponnesian War. I think throughout the 70s and into the 80s. And then in the late 90s, or no, was this 2003 this one came out? I think it was maybe 2000. Yeah, 2003. He came up with this single volume edition that I guess kind of synthesizes all the other stuff from his other editions and puts it all into one single volume. And he does so in certain ways very masterfully. This is a complicated war between Athens and Sparta, but also with all of their different allied city-states and the Persian Empire involved. And there are a lot of things going on in this war. And it also lasted quite a long time. It lasted, way longer than they expected it to. Now, last year I had read Thucydides, who did his History of the Peloponnesian War, an ancient historian, and he died before he could finish writing that, before the war, I think, was even over. And I'm going to begin, actually, this week reading Xenophon, who does end up picking up where Thucydides left off. So I thought this would be a perfect time to read this one for Historathon. And Kagan, I will say, does a terrific job of taking the ancient sources, and we're talking written sources. He has a terrific command of the written sources, especially the ancient sources, and it kind of gives a sober retelling of what happened. Sometimes he agrees with Thucydides, sometimes he disagrees with them, and it's not just Thucydides, he's got other ancient writers that he's also pulling from. And he does a terrific job with that. He gives very reasonable explanations for why certain things happened, or why they likely were to have happened in the way that they did. And he does a great job of guiding the reader through this very complicated event that had a lot of, the pendulum kept swinging one way or the other between these two powers. Now, like I said, he really uses these written sources. I didn't see a whole lot of evidence, and maybe it's found more in the other volumes, in the multi-volume edition or version of this. I didn't see a lot of archaeological evidence really being used in here. And also, this is largely it's kind of a military history, but really it's a political history. He spends a lot of time trying to explain why the city of Athens made the decisions that it did. And sometimes we get into a little bit more military history with certain maneuverings. Now, Kagan, of course, is limited by what has been passed down over thousands of years. So there's certain things that he just can't know. I did find myself, because I am somebody who loves social history, wishing that there was a little bit more of that in here. uh, I kept wondering, like, okay, so at one point a plague, the Athenians had basically walled themselves inside the city while the Peloponnesians, the Spartans, like ravaging the countryside. Rather than go out and confront the Spartans directly, they're basically, I wouldn't say hiding, but they're trying to stick to their strengths. And unfortunately, a plague goes through Athens and just is devastating. I wish that there were moments where Kagan would pause and let us know kind of what that might have been like, to have a plague ravaging a city, in that period of history. I wish that there was more things like what would have been like to have been what would it have been like, excuse me, to have been a hoplite. What kind of training do they have? What was their equipment like? What was it like in the thick of battle? What was it like for women and children during this time? If an army was going through, living off the land. We at one point I remember reading in Thucydides, when the Athenians, I think it's the island of Melos. Hopefully I'm remembering that right. Where they just do horrendous things. They kill like every man on that island, and then they take all the women and children and put them into slavery. And I remember reading that in Thucydides and being like, it's a devastating. It was a terrible thing that Athens did, and Kagan doesn't give much more attention to it than Thucydides does. And I kind of wish that he would pause at times like that and kind of let us really understand the gravity of what just happened. What did slavery really mean during that time? What would have been likely fate for these women and children, who were just taken? Where might have they been taken to? So this is a book that will do an excellent job of letting you know what happened in the war and kind of how it happened. But it's not going to give you an indication of what it would have felt like in that war, what it would have been like to have experienced the war. And I'm not faulting Kagan for that. This is still a thick book, and it's a good accomplishment. It's a great accomplishment. It's just something that I felt I was desiring throughout as I was reading it. And luckily, he organizes things very well. He explains things very clearly. We get a lot of helpful maps. Once again, that glare in here. I know that there was another participant in Historathon 2023 who also read this in the month of January. And one of the things that he had said was that he wished that the maps were maybe a little more illustrated. And I assume that he meant things like, maybe troop movements, arrows, or something like that. And I can agree with that. I wish that there was maybe a little more detail in some of those maps. But otherwise, those maps were very, very helpful in figuring out where we are talking about, because there seemed to be countless city-states across Greece and that whole area. So yeah, I'm very glad that I read this. It's an excellent work on the Peloponnesian War. Like I said, a little more of a political history than anything else. But certainly, if you want to know kind of what happened and why, this is you really can't, I think, do better in a single volume work. The other thing that I read, and this is actually the first thing that I read for February, and that is Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. This is what the movie Field of Dreams was based on, and this was originally released in 1982. Now, I had watched Field of Dreams with my son like last summer, and I always considered it a very good, father-son movie. And realizing as I was watching, I'm like, oh, that's right, it's based on a book called Shoeless Joe. And I kind of thought, in passing, I'd like to read that, I'd like to check it out. And then not long after that, I went to Goodwill and found this, which has this kind of, this is actually a UK edition, which I like this cover design better than the stuff I've seen from in the US. And I would not consider myself a baseball fan. I like baseball, but I don't follow the major leagues at all. I really don't have interest in watching it on television. I do get a little bit bored by it, I have to say. However, I grew up really liking watching baseball movies. Field of Dreams being one of them. I used to love baseball. I think they make actually very good cinema, more than really any other sport. I think they make good movies. And I also really love baseball history. We used to go every so often to Cooperstown, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. It's within a few hours drive, but it would be like a long weekend sort of thing that we would go and check that out. And even though I'm not into Major League Baseball at all, I do like minor league baseball. I don't follow it, but I love going to minor league games. The stadiums are smaller, it's way cheaper, there's not a bad seat in the house, and it just feels like the way a baseball game should feel to me, rather than going to a larger stadium, a Major League stadium, which I also used to do as a kid. So, I'm saying this to say that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of baseball, even though I like it. I'm not a fan. But nevertheless, I did like this quite a bit. I really did like this book. It's very much like that, because you call it magical realism, fantasy. There are some major differences between this and the movie, although they follow the same basic structure. But we have some characters in here that aren't in the movie. There's like an older man named, I think, Eddie Simmons, whose claim to fame is being the oldest surviving Chicago Cub, although there's some plot developments with that. Ray Kinsella, the main character in here, supposedly not really named after the author, but in the book, he has a twin brother that we end up meeting, and his girlfriend named Gypsy, there. And instead of Terrence Mann, like in the movie, played by James Earl Jones, we have real life J.D. Salinger, which I thought was quite interesting. Very interesting choice there. But otherwise, a lot of the stuff is very similar. It is quite the same. I do think that the movie did a great job of maybe highlighting certain aspects of the story more effectively than the book does, but the book is very well written. I like Kinsella's prose a lot. I think that he has a terrific knack for describing things. He kind of has these little digressions and asides as he's going through, bouncing back and forth sometimes between time. I don't mean like literally the character. I mean the character's thoughts as they go, to introduce things that happened in the past. It has a great flow to it. I really like the writing here, and I'm just charmed by the story. It still is kind of a father-son story, but I think that the movie actually emphasizes that a lot more. In the movie, the main character was kind of estranged from his father. He had a falling out with him before his father passed away, and that's not so here. He always seemed to have a really good relationship with his father, and so we don't have that kind of tension. We don't have that thing hanging over his head. I like the character of Ray in here. Overall, he's not like this alpha male. He's a farmer. He's trying it out. He's not very good at it. He seems kind of half interested in farming most of the time. He's kind of a dreamer. But I enjoyed his character overall quite a bit. But yeah, it was beautifully written, very charming. Even if you're not a baseball fan, and it does go into some baseball details sometimes, but I think that even somebody who's not a baseball fan would actually really enjoy this book. So I would highly recommend it. I liked it a lot. So those are the two books that I read fairly recently. This one I finished, once again, Peloponnesian War for Historathon 2023 in January, and Shoeless Joe is the first book that I read in February. If you read either of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.